So to make the hover thing work, we looked for some mouse events, and then what did you do? What did you do when on onMouseEnter? What did you have it do? Somebody who did it. Go ahead. Yeah. Oh shucks, we're using the DOM. This is React. We don't do that anymore. That's okay. That's okay. You made it work. But yeah, we're not going to use any. We're not going to use any DOM functions. We're going to stick pure React. Yeah. Okay. So what actually changes in the hover pseudo class in the CSS is the opacity, right? So we have these two images. There they are. And right now they're one on top of the other. That's what the absolute positioning in their CSS is about. So they're one on top of the other. And then what the hover does is reduces the opacity of the second one to 0 so that you just see the other one through it. And it has the effect of making it just look like it turns into the other one. So it's an opacity thing. And we put a transition on here to make the opacity kind of smoothly animate. So when the mouse enters, we want to reduce the opacity to nothing. When the mouse leaves, we want to bring it back up to 1. So we need to change something in state and base the opacity on that. So basically the state should tell us whether we are hovered or not. So if we need state, we can't use a stateless functional component anymore, obviously. So we're going to have to change this to a class. Doesn't take long to change. Just change it from const to class. Get rid of the equals arrow function. And all this stuff, what was once the return value for the entire component is now the return value for the render method. So let's put render here. I'll indent all of this. Add my closing curly brace. Et voila. And I need to remember to inherit from react.component. As we saw yesterday, you could always import component from React and just say component. Doesn't make any difference. Same thing. React.component versus actually importing component. Because we need to do state. And where do we define state? Where do we initialize state? In the constructor. So we could say this dot state equals something. Now there is a new syntax. It is currently a stage 3 proposal, which means it will make it in the standard, and it is not likely to change before it is standardized. But it is not quite standardized yet. It does already work natively in some browsers, and Babel has supported it for quite a while. That lets us do property assignments outside the constructor. So it's actually a filthy lie that you absolutely have to put it inside the constructor. You can do this. Just state equals, not this dot state equals, just state equals, and that will create a property called state and set it equal to that. So you can do this now. Babel will translate that down to the earlier versions of JavaScript. And it does work natively in some browsers now anyway. But since we're always using Babel when we use React, it's totally safe. So we can do this. Same idea. So we need something to keep track of basically whether or not we are hovering over that thing right now. I'll just call it new icon. That's what it is, the new icon hovered false. Because it's false when the page loads, right? So new icon hovered starts false. Then we need a couple functions that are going to change that. So I'll say handle mouse enter and handle mouse leave. mouse enter this dot set state, and we'll set, don't forget to pass an object, new icon hovered to true. And when we leave, this dot set state, new icon hovered to false. So then we need to call those at the appropriate time. So it's this link right here, a class name, new note. That's the one. I'm going to watch for the mouse to enter that. So on mouse enter, we will run an arrow function that calls this dot handle mouse enter. Why do I bother with the arrow function there? Because if I tried to call this dot set state and I didn't do that, this wouldn't be the right thing. We could also have used bind here instead. And there's a third way that we'll see later today. So that's onMouseEnter, onMouseLeave. We'll set that also to an arrow function that calls this dot handle mouseLeave. And before we mess with the opacity, we'll check to make sure that this much works. Failed to compile. It does not work. Unexpected token. I accidentally had a space between my equal sign and my angle bracket. All right, so let's look at our React dev tools. Here we are. Let's look at our sidebar component. I'm going to search for sidebar here. There we go. I see my props in my state. I see new icon hovered false. Watch what happens as I put my mouse over that. Changes to true. Move it back out, false. So that much works. The state does change. So now we just need to make that change the opacity of this image here, the second one, the one with a class of outline. So I'm already applying a bunch of style to this. And now I need another rule in there. I need another style rule, basically. Remember that instead of referring to some property of some style object, we could have just like made an object literal inside there and just written our styles. Could have done that. If we had done that, then I could have said, say, opacity, colon, and then does everyone know what a ternary is? It's like an inline if-else. Does anybody need me to explain what that is? Because I will. I'll do it. Okay. So it's an if-else. You put the condition first. So the condition here is this dot state dot new icon hovered. That's going to be true or false, right? This dot state dot new icon hovered. Then you put a question mark. Then you put what would happen if it's true, then a colon, then what happens if it's false. So the if first, opacity, if it is hovered, that's when it becomes transparent. That's when the opacity is 0. Colon, the else, what happens if new icon hovered is false? It should be opaque 1. So when you're just assigning a value based on the value of some Boolean, and the values that you're assigning are very simple, it's not uncommon to use a ternary in a place like this. So let's see what that does. Expected it to look a lot worse. There it goes. It does. Okay. So now my other styles are no longer applying to the second image, and so it's big and stupid looking. So as I hover over it, though, it does disappear. The opacity goes down to 0. And as I move my mouse back out, it's opaque again. So that's what I wanted. But I still wanted all the styles that were in styles.newNodeImage. That's the problem. So how can I combine those styles with this style that I wrote here? Remember the spread operator that we used on an array? It let us copy arrays. So basically, that's the ellipsis. So if I said ... styles.newNoteImg, that breaks out all the items that were in this object and places it inside this object. So if that were the only thing inside the curly braces, it would just make an exact copy of this. But I can also add new properties at that time. So this gets me all of the styles that were in that, as well as my custom style here. Hey. That's what we're looking for. Look at that. Look how smooth. Questions? Yeah.
Instead of a ternary operator, if you wanted to use an if, would it have been possible?
Yes.
Because sometimes, like it says, it has to be an expression.
Yeah. So you might have had to make it into a function or something. You could have done it without a ternary, but let's see if we just. Yeah, I'm not sure we can just say if. Yeah, if this dot, what's it called again? State dot new icon hovered. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna. Not in JavaScript. In some languages that would work. But yeah, there's not really an inline if. So you would have had to use a function or something. Yeah. Make sure I didn't break it. All right, it's all good. Cool. Handle mouse events in the sidebar. Beautiful.